Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
I hope you're looking forward to a long weekend wherever you're joining us here on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. This is Balance of Power, the Friday edition. Doesn't it feel good to say that? And I'll tell you what, Washington has already cleared out. My 90-minute commute on Tuesday, same exact drive, took me 19 minutes today, which gives you a sense of where we are here inside the bubble. Good luck finding anyone. But you can find a table at the restaurant of your choice. So good luck if you're a weekend warrior here heading out on the roads or the airlines. By God, it's going to be an interesting one as the candidates try to put themselves in the best position they can on this holiday weekend. Donald Trump in the Bronx last night. What do we think of this? The headline in the New York Times, at a Trump rally in the Bronx, chants of build that wall. And great color from the scene in front of him, a more diverse crowd, as I read, than typical of his rallies, with many black and Hispanic voters wearing MAGA hats in New York City last night. Donald Trump says he can win it. Most people don't think that is possible. We'll talk to it about it now with Gregory Korte, who's, of course, always got his eyes on the campaign trail. Bloomberg News, White House and politics reporter. Great to see you, Gregory. Happy Friday. The Bronx, huh? Yeah. Felt like Friday last night for Donald Trump, I guess. He's not serious, right? Is he a contender in New York for starters? Is that an alternate universe? Or?
He's talking a big game, but I will believe it the moment that the Trump campaign spends a dime on television advertising in the New York market.
Yeah.
It's a very expensive market to advertise in. It's a huge state. It's a tough state to win. It would be delusional to think that he could win it. But he's there for two reasons. One is that he's there anyway because he's on trial in New York. So he's on a pretty short leash. And while he's there, he's decided to make some lemonade out of the lemons that the Manhattan District Attorney has given him. And also because being in New York is a good foil for his audience, right? He can campaign against New York to the rest of the country, which is popular in a lot of parts of the country.
Clean up this mess in the city. He says we'll clean up the subways. Do you think he's ever been on the New York subway?
You would have to think in his entire life he would have had to, but
I've been looking for a photograph, Gregory. I can't find one. 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of questions here then. That's New York. How about the demographics we saw at this rally last night? Are we to believe that Donald Trump, and we have polling on this, is in fact pulling black and Latino voters into the fold in this campaign and away from Joe Biden?
You know, that remains to be seen. Right now, if you look at the polling, he does seem to be making inroads. But remember that we're 6 months out. And what we see from, a lot of voters, not just black and Hispanic voters, but a lot of voters like to talk about being undecided. They like to tell pollsters they're keeping an open mind, and particularly among black voters who really want you to earn their vote year after year. A lot of them have been sitting on the sidelines, much higher numbers of undecided voters in that community. And that's what's been depressing Joe Biden's numbers there. But look, you have to give him credit. Trump himself is seeing numbers in the 20s among black voters, even higher among Hispanic voters, as the Hispanic population in this country begins to mature, right? Where you have first and second generation families now becoming third and fourth generation families as they become more integrated into parts of American society. And lose some of maybe that the Hispanic identity. That yes, they have becoming more Republican, and that is a generational thing. It's a long-term thing, and Trump is taking advantage of it.
It's a really interesting moment, and we're told that the commander-in-chief was sort of employing the powers of incumbency here with the state visit this week with the Kenyan president. It was interesting when you look at the guest list for that state dinner last night. To what extent was that messaging to the demographic we're describing?
I'm not sure. It is, as we've been reporting, the first state dinner to honor an African head of state in 16 years.
Gregory.
Remarkable to me, looking back on it, I covered the Obama administration, that President Obama,
It's amazing.
who has ancestry in Kenya, would not have done this.
Of course, he, unlike Joe Biden, visited Africa, which is something that this president has promised to do.
Yes, Africa always gets talked about, but almost as an afterthought in foreign policy. It's becoming increasingly important, as is much of the global South, with the rivalry with China, and we may be entering a new sort of soft Cold War here. But in terms of U.S. voters, domestic politics, look, there are a lot of constituencies, especially Democratic constituencies, who think that Joe Biden is maybe spending too much time on foreign policy. And he has had some foreign policy issues to deal with, not just China, but you talk about Israel and you talk about Ukraine. And given where we are with the inflation, given where we are with the economy, there is a strong feeling in many parts of even the Biden coalition that he needs to spend more time at home. And that's going to be challenging because he's about to go off to the G7 and France and Normandy. All very important parts of what a president does, but it's an election year, and that's why there's going to continue to be this tension here.
Gregory Korte, thank you, as always, for stopping by reporting for Bloomberg from Washington. I'm Joe Mathieu. This is Balance of Power, and I'm glad you're with us here on the radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. It was at the bilateral news conference that Joe Biden held with the president of Kenya yesterday that the matter of Israel came up. We expected this would be the case. Of course, the Biden White House wanted to talk about investments in Kenya and throughout the continent, but reporters are going to ask what they want to ask about. And the matter of the ICC came up, these arrest warrants that we're understanding are being pursued for Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, right alongside leaders of Hamas. Joe Biden responding to a question about this yesterday in the East Room. Let's listen.
We made our position clear on the ICC. We don't recognize the jurisdiction of ICC the way it's being exercised, and it's that simple. We don't think there's an equivalence between what Israel did and what Hamas did.
Fast forward to news today, the UN's top court ordering Israel to immediately halt its military operations in Rafah, partially granting a request by South Africa in a case over genocide allegations. This is where we start our conversation with Hadar Susskind. He is now president CEO of Americans for Peace, served as Sergeant First Class in the IDF. And it's great to have you back, Hadar. Your thoughts first on this latest development from the International Court of Justice, which I am sure, frankly, most Americans have never heard of. This is unenforceable, but it's an important message. How will Israel respond?
Well, Israeli political leaders, starting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, but going, frankly, all the way through the opposition, are, of course, opposed to this. They believe that that the International Criminal Court, that the ICJ, that these institutions don't have jurisdiction and, frankly, don't have Israel's interests at heart. So that's the broad response of the Israeli government. I will say there is a range of different views within the Israeli population, and many of those believe that these things are reflective of the politics, but in a way where we shouldn't look at them as scoring a goal for one team or the other. So it's not good, it's not bad. What it is a tragic reflection of the reality that Israelis and Palestinians find themselves in, of months and months and months of ongoing war that is, again, only tragic for both sides.
Well, as I mentioned, South Africa is alleging genocide. The language here becomes important. Israel, of course, denies that. How should this be described?
One of the things, and I apologize to going back to the same frame so often, but it continues to be true that so often folks on both sides are pushing to the extremes, using straw man arguments, using the most extreme language. So, whether this is genocide or not, whether that's, simply in all of Gaza and Rafah, can be argued. I am not an international law expert to give a definition of that. but there's no question that it's horrific, and there's no question that it's tragic. So it doesn't need to be genocide in order to be horrible and to be opposed. And likewise, I heard, in your earlier conversation, the questions coming up about, is there equivalency, or is the international court trying to create an equivalency between Hamas and the Israeli leadership, which again is a straw man argument. The international court has brought these charges or called for these warrants against both Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, and against Hamas leaders. They didn't say they're equivalent. They didn't say they did the same thing. Frankly, the charges are, many of them, different. So the equivalency argument is, again, just people falling back, trying to use these straw man arguments as opposed to really dealing with the facts. What's happening on the ground? Tens of thousands of people have been killed in Gaza. That's a fact. No one questions it. People still argue about the exact number and argue about how many are combatants, but there's no question that tens of thousands of people have died, that people are suffering from hunger, if not famine. Thousands and thousands of homes and buildings have been destroyed. It's horrific. And again, going back to the Hamas side, October 7th is unquestionably war crimes. They killed 1,200 people. They took hostages, civilians. So all of these things can be and should be strongly opposed without fighting over whether or not it is equivalent. It doesn't have to be equivalent to all be wrong.
Well, we get lost in the language here very often, lost in the jargon, for sure. And I'd like to talk to you more about what is happening on the ground. You're absolutely right. It's one thing that we specialize in here, and we waste a lot of time doing it. Hadar, one thing that has been accomplished is the construction of this temporary pier with tens of millions of dollars and a lot of effort by the U.S. military. It's barely being used, is what we understand. How would you describe the current state on the ground when it comes to delivering humanitarian aid?
Well, that is extremely, extremely problematic for sure. The state of delivering aid overall. It changes very regularly with announcements by the Israeli government that they've opened or closed a specific crossing. Also, those announcements are not always met by reality on the ground. There actually have been a lot of questions as to whether any aid that has come in through this U.S.-funded pier has actually reached people in Gaza. It's unclear, but there have been claims both ways. What I think is clear is that it is just a reflection of how broken the politics is that this pier is necessary at all, right? It is not physically necessary to build this pier in order to bring in more aid. All that was necessary is opening the crossings. There's no question that bringing it in by truck through Israel, through the crossings in both the north and the south of Gaza is by far more effective. The U.S. did this, built this pier, spent, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars, not tens of millions, because they couldn't get the Israeli government to agree to open those crossings. And so this was a workaround. The fact that the U.S. government felt it necessary to work around the obstruction of Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think speaks for itself.
Speaks for itself. Where are we going to be a couple of weeks from now? Because the White House is trying to walk a line on Rafah, a red line, dare I say, as President Biden articulated a couple of weeks ago. The fact of the matter is we haven't seen the full-on invasion and occupation of Rafah that some expected. It's been referred to as a limited incursion and therefore not a violation of the red line. When you put your IDF hat back on, Hadar, what's going on in Rafah, and is this the extent to which we're going to see the military involved?
Well, I think if you look at reporting, limited though it is, coming out of Rafah, people don't consider this a targeted invasion. Again, initially, the Israeli response was that they were not invading and certainly not occupying the city of Rafah, but rather just the crossing between Gaza and Egypt. They did that. They then did move forward. They have increasingly bombed and taken military further and further in. They are doing it in a slow, specific way. I mean, it's pretty clear. It's one of these, here's the line. Okay, is my toe over the line now? Okay, what about now? What about now? And again, President Biden said a full invasion of Rafah is a red line, but that hasn't been defined what exactly that means. And so that's what the dance is right now. Whether this will continue in this way, I don't know. I hope that what we're going to see is an end to this war, which is what.
Well,
is
I want you to come back and talk to us as we feel our way through this, Hadar. I wish we had more time, as always. Hadar Susskind with Americans for Peace. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We'll continue our conversation ahead with an eye on the campaign trail and Governor Chris Sununu. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Mathieu. Just a couple days ago, Nikki Haley made big news here in Washington, announcing her intention to vote for Donald Trump. A lot of questions about whether that was, in fact, a real endorsement of the former president, as she did not tell her supporters to do the same. She, in fact, encouraged Donald Trump to work for their support, something I discussed yesterday in a wide-ranging conversation about the presidential campaign with the governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, of course, an ardent supporter of Nikki Haley when she was on the campaign trail. Here's what he said.
People will say, well, if you're voting for them, are you endorsing them? Are you supporting them? Are you campaigning with them?
Is there a difference?
I think I would never speak for Nikki Haley, but like myself, we're going to vote for her. Obviously, we have a lot of complaints about Donald Trump, as a lot of folks do.
I know.
But elections are about choices. They really are. It's A or B. You don't have to be all or one. You don't have to be extreme one way or the other. But if you want democracy to work, you got to get out there and vote. And a lot of folks are saying, gee, we don't like the bombastic style of Trump. We don't like the chaos. But we need a change. We need results. We need somebody to do something about inflation, about the border. Those are the top issues. And I think Nikki did a great job kind of pointing that out, that, look, people care about issues. You have to talk about these issues. You can't just kind of say, we know you have record credit card debt, but ignore that. You're all fine. Bidenomics is working. It's not, right? And so we call that gaslighting, right? Basically not validating the reality that a lot of individuals are feeling right now. And if anything, that's where I think Biden has really kind of screwed this thing up.
Well,
it's
some
not
would
just
say
about
as
policy.
well.
It's telling people that it's working when it's clearly not.
Understood. Some would say as well, with Donald Trump's association with the economy that we see bearing out in the polls, that doesn't match with his record on the deficit, for instance, either, which I know is a big issue for you and a big issue for Nikki Haley. Yeah. Did you help her work through this? Did you arrive at this decision together?
No. I love Nikki. I think she's the best. I wanted, since she got out of the race, I wanted her to be nothing but happy, spending some time with her family. Her husband finally got home after nearly a year-long deployment, so I know she's spending a lot of time with him, and that's been wonderful. She came out and she had an event yesterday and was asked, and she said she was going to vote for Trump. Yes. But I think she also made a really critical point, which was there's still a lot of voters out there that have to be earned, and Trump has to do some work. He's got to do some work on the issues. He's got to do some work to make sure that all those folks that may not have voted for him in the primary on the Republican side are going to come home, and they're not going to do it just because. He's got to go earn them. But there's time for him to do that. Biden has a bigger challenge on his hands, I think, in that I think Biden's base has walked from him more than the Trump base has walked from Trump. I think independents are walking away from Biden. I think the younger voters that really should be all with Biden right now, a lot of them just won't vote. So Biden has his own set of chores in the next 6 months.
Well, that's clear, and it's bearing out in our own polling here at Bloomberg. And my God, the Trump base won't budge, even as he sits in criminal court. But she said more than, as you point out, more than just that she was going to vote for him. There was one particular line that stuck out to me. A loud part, she said, of each party wants us to abandon our allies, appease our enemies, and focus only on the problems we have at home. She said this worldview has already put America in great danger, and the threat is mounting by the day. That sounds like she's speaking to Donald Trump. Who's the audience there?
Well, so a couple things. When it comes to foreign policy, appreciating that you get world peace through America's strength, I think there's no one better in understanding those issues than Nikki Haley. So I think she's just spot on.
Is she worried about
those
this protectionist bent in the Republican Party?
It's not just the Republican Party. Look, when you look at folks that say international issues are the most important, it's about a 50-50 split. Those who think Trump portrays an image of strength that Biden doesn't portray. I think some of Biden's policies were more in line with with where we should be, but he doesn't portray the strength. He's kind of gone back and forth on Israel, right? I'm a big supporter of Israel. Got to stand with him unquestionably. He was unquestionably with him on May 7th, and on May 8th, he's like, by the way, we're going to withhold weapons. So you can't have your foot half in and half out. Yeah. That kind of inconsistency is a problem for Biden. I think some of Trump's statements, quasi-supportive of Putin and calling him this smart guy and all of that sort of thing, that stuff scares people as well. So I think they're both have a lot of problems on the international front.
Well, this is an interesting view to hear from you on both of these, because, it's supposed to be my job to try to make you turn into a pretzel to explain to me why you want to vote for Donald Trump or plan to vote for Donald Trump.
Of course.
After effectively mounting a strong campaign against him and helping Nikki Haley. You've already done that interview. I want to bring you back to the Snowshoe Club in Concord the night before the primary. And there was hope inside the barn that night that something different, that there was an alternative. And this person, Nikki Haley, had everybody talking as they were drinking by the fire and wondering what might happen the next day after you did a lot of work in the state for her. What happens to those old line Reagan Republicans? What happens to the donors who followed Nikki Haley or the suburban women who support still, and by the way, some early primaries that we've seen, they're still showing up in primaries for Nikki Haley? Do they stay home? Where do you tell them to go?
I think the majority of them will come over and vote for Trump. But I think Nikki made a great point. There's still a lot of them and that have to be earned. And I go back to that point. It's not that they can't be earned. Will the donor base come over to Trump? Probably not. Not like they had in the past. No? I don't think so. I think a lot of the significant Republican donor base is going to put their money into the Senate seats, the governorships, the congressional races, really trying to drive that home there. Trump has kind of co-opted a bit the RNC to be his kind of donor feeder system, but they've had some success. I don't think it's going to be like it was back in 2016 and even in 2020. The voters themselves, though, those are the ones that have to be spoken to, and there's plenty of time for Trump to do that if he wants to earn them on the Republican side. Like I said, I don't think there's any policy changes Biden could implement today to get an appreciable different result that would drive people back over to him. So Biden's in a tougher position right now. Where it goes with everyone's looking at the trials, right?
Sure.
I don't think the trials have an appreciable difference in this campaign.
What if there's a conviction? Does that feel different?
No. Look, I'll say this. Three things are going to happen. He's either innocent, and that's a big win for Trump because not only would he be off on this one, but he would then claim that all the others are politically motivated, and it would put a shadow of a doubt on all of them. Same with a hung jury. He probably gets the same result. A conviction, people say, I just don't think it's going to drive people away from him. And if you are driven away by that, I respect your right to say that that's a line too far if he's convicted.
Could it keep independents away from him?
No, I don't think so. Because independents...
They break Trump even with a conviction.
If they've already broken away from Biden, it's because they don't like the convictions, they don't like January 6th, they don't like election denial, but they are getting crushed by inflation. Inflation is the issue of the day. There's no question about it. And the border. Those are still remain to be the top two issues. And those are really bad when Biden doesn't do well with those at all.
Will you play a role at the Republican convention in Milwaukee? Will you have a message for delegates?
No, not really. No, look, at the convention, it's going to be a fait accompli. Trump's going to be the nominee. It'll be kind of Trumpville convention. If I go out there, maybe I'll go to do some.
But you're a unicorn in the Republican Party. Shouldn't he invite Chris Sununu?
I don't care. No, I've been invited. and
for this convention.
I don't know to speak. I don't know if they've settled all that. But I've been invited. I may go out. I may not. It really depends on the schedule. But if anything, it's a logistics nightmare.
You better believe it.
There's like a lot of traffic. You got to stay like an hour away. I think conventions are a big logistics mess.
Well, that's
big headache.
Either way, that part's true.
It's kind of like going to the Super Bowl. I think I'd rather just watch it from home.
Donald Trump has found religion on early voting, which I find fascinating. He's encouraging people to embrace this now after demonizing it for years. This requires a re-education, some would argue, of a Republican electorate who now think early voting is evil.
Yeah, I will say this. I don't like early voting either. I don't think Trump likes early voting, but I think what the Republican Party is saying, if the rules in your state allow for early voting, then get out and do early voting. Play by the rules. Don't just sit there and don't do absentee or don't do early voting. You got to play by the rules to make sure you're getting out the vote, because that's what this is all about.
Play the cards you have.
Yeah, so I don't think any of us like early voting. I think there's a lot of problems with it. Yeah. But in the states where it's allowed, you better play by those rules, and Republicans better go out there and work hard at it.
We saw something very troubling in our latest Bloomberg swing state poll. It came out just yesterday. Half of the electorate in the swing states that are going to decide this election are fearing violence. They fear an outbreak of violence surrounding this election. the conventions we just mentioned, around the election itself, if it's undecided for days. People have shades of January 6th still, of course, in their memories. But it was equal shares. Democrats and Republicans had this same fear. What are governors like you going to have to do to keep this election
Well, let's understand
safe?
why that is. You're seeing what's happening on college campuses right now, right? The protests, the violence, it's not peaceful protests. They think as long as it's in the name of social justice, it's okay to break the rules and break the law. It's not. It's absolutely not. We're a nation of laws, and you have to nip it. So as governors, for example, when we looked at what was happening in the universities, we were very proactive. We talked to them. We were transparent. What are the rules? What are the guidelines? Where will you make arrests? Hold folks accountable. If you kind of nip it in the bud early, you can really make sure that it doesn't fester to something bigger. States that didn't handle it early, or university systems that didn't handle it early, bring in law enforcement, do the right thing. They're the ones that are suffering the most. On the other side of things, you have the election denial and all that sort of thing, the fears of January 6th. That's legitimate. We've seen it sprout up in January 6th, and so obviously there's concerns on the other side there. The one thing I try to encourage folks is to be optimistic. As all the election denial, guess what? Biden won the election, and he was deemed the winner. And there was a smooth transition of power post-January 6th, but on January 20th, Biden slept at the White House, right? So it worked out. And so I've had folks say, yeah, but I was from Arizona, and they said my vote didn't count. But it did count. And even though they challenged it, the system worked, right? The institution stood strong through all those wins and all those pressures. Our institutions stood strong.
And you believe they will again?
I do. I believe in the institutions. Look, our institutions have stood strong through everything from civil wars, world wars, pandemics, 9/11, January 6th. They're tough times. They're big bumps in the road. But, man, our founding fathers really designed this system well and believe in it because it has worked. Up until now. And I'm very optimistic about, even though there may be bumps in the road and complaints on both sides or whatever might come, America's going to be okay. Sun's going to come up.
You love being in Washington. I know you want to stay here as long as you can. But when you're back home and you're walking down Elm Street in Manchester and you're talking to people, what is it that gives you hope? What are we missing here in the Capitol?
Look, I would say this. There's a lot of talk about democracy being eroded.
Yes.
And I go back to that. And if anything, I tell people, I'm not trying to tell you how to vote. You vote for Trump, vote for Trump. Vote for Biden, vote for Biden. Do whatever you want, but vote. Do not let anyone tell you, well, just don't vote. That's the most un-American thing you can do, because so many people on this planet don't have the ability to vote and choose their leadership. And at the heart of it, you can't say democracy is being eroded, democracy is being threatened, but I won't participate in democracy. That's crazy, right? Your vote is all that will decide who leads this country, who leads your school board, who leads in your governorships or your mayor. Your vote is everything to that process. So don't waste the opportunity to make sure your voice is heard. Your voice is valid. It has merit. I mean, we've had presidential elections, go back to 2000, that have come down to a couple hundred votes here or there. Right. You never know where it's going to be. In all of these toss-up states, as you pointed out, even New Hampshire now is a toss-up. Holy smokes, that hasn't happened in 20 years. It's always been Democrats on the presidential side have always won. They have this really awesome Republican governor, but the Democrats on the presidential side have won for quite a while. But again, you just don't know what's going to happen. So I think you're going to see a higher voter turnout than most people think. I think what gives me hope is that the institutions stand strong, your vote does matter, and I have a lot of confidence that regardless of the outcome, we are going to have a peaceful transition of power.
The governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, many thanks for sitting down with us and being so generous with his time. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Mathieu on Bloomberg TV and radio on the week that crypto grew up in Washington. That's what I keep hearing, at least. We've talked about this each step of the way, and House passage of the FIT21 market structure bill this week was the moment, and the cherry on top might have been the Ethereum ETFs being approved by the SEC. This has all been driven in part with the help of Congressman French Hill, the Republican from Arkansas. Not only serves on the House Financial Services Committee, it's important he is chair of the subcommittee on digital assets, financial technology, and inclusion. And he's with us at the table on this Friday. What a treat to see you in studio, sir. Welcome.
Great to be with
Cheers.
you, Joe. Glad to be with you.
Are you taking a victory lap here? This is something that a lot of people didn't think could happen in this Congress.
It's a big issue, and I'm so glad to see such a strong bipartisan vote. 279 members of the House voted for our market structure bill, which gives clarity for the first time and a roadmap for digital assets, how to offer them, where they trade, whether it's under SEC rules or the CFTC rules, how to be a dealer, how to be a broker, how to do custodian, be a custodian. Mm-hmm. So this was a big bipartisan success.
It needs to go to the Senate now, where I'm told it's a steeper climb. We've had some tell us that it does not have the votes to pass the Senate. What are you hearing?
Well, what's interesting, over the past 2 years working for payment stablecoin legislation, which is a dollar-backed private stablecoin issued by the private sector, not a central bank digital currency, that work has bipartisan support. I've seen leaders in the Senate speak out in favor of that. And on the market structure bill, we've had Senate interest for years on that. Senators Loomis and Gillibrand, for example, have been working on ideas there. Senators Stabenow and Bozeman have been working on ideas. So I think we're listening to senators. I think our big vote, 279 votes in favor, 71 Democrat votes in favor, will help send a message that we've got text on market structure in a pretty good place to start working with the Senate on.
The alternative is come on down and register. Would this have happened without the approach that Gary Gensler has taken from the SEC?
Well, Chair Clayton under the Trump administration, Chair Gensler here in the Biden administration could have used exemptive relief along the way to narrow some of these regulatory gaps. But President Biden himself, in their executive order and in the Financial Stability Oversight Council's report, says there's a regulatory gap between commodities, securities, and how to do this in the right way. And they argue that it should have been a legislative solution. So I do think we've taken the right direction to have a legislative solution, and that perhaps neither Chairman Gensler at the SEC and certainly Chairman Benham at the CFTC could not really do it in a full, effective way without legislation.
Well, a lot of, as you know, crypto executives felt like they were being set up, that there was no real way to navigate because there were no rules to the road. And just coming in to quote-unquote register might cost you $250,000 in attorney's fees in dealing with the SEC.
Or more. I mean,
or more.
Or effectively, that just wasn't happening. Come in and register was just a black hole. There was no exit. It was the original Hotel California. You could check in, but you couldn't check out on that process. And so that's why, again, I think a legislative solution is the best way to go. And it'll be more effective for everybody in the space. Innovators, venture capitalists, consumer protection, investors.
I mentioned the Ethereum ETFs, of course, now on the heels of the Bitcoin ETFs. Is the institutional involvement that is predicted to follow here really what helps crypto mature? It helps your argument in Washington.
I think so. I think, look, Chairman Clayton and Chairman Gensler didn't feel like they had the right analytical framework to approve an exchange-traded product for Bitcoin. But after analysis and the work of Commissioner Peirce, they found that the cash market and the analytics around that looked stable, and so they approved Bitcoin. The federal court said they should approve Bitcoin ETP, and I think that federal court litigation and the analytic work done by the commission staff paved the way for this Ethereum decision this week.
Is stablecoin next then? You mentioned that there was talk about that maybe being put together with safe banking during the FAA extension. Right. None of them happened.
Right.
What's the way forward?
Well, I think a dollar-backed payment stablecoin under U.S. law with U.S. oversight is a real critical need for this ecosystem. And so I do expect it to be next. I think Ranking Member Maxine Waters on the Financial Services Committee, Chairman Patrick McHenry have done a great job working on this. We've had tremendous engagement from the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve. So I think we're close. But you're right. We're looking for that legislative vehicle for payment stablecoins. But to your point a few minutes ago about the Senate, I think there's solid Senate and House support to move that as well. We just have to find the right approach.
Maybe post-election on the agenda.
Could be. I mean, we're going to wait and
a lot
see
of
how to
crypto money floating around in this campaign all of a sudden, isn't there?
I've seen that.
You have, yeah, and it's impacting some races in a big way. As we spend time with Congressman French Hill, I want you to put your hat on another committee, and that's Foreign Affairs. This has been a very busy week from China to Israel, and I'd like to ask you about both. You may be preparing a Codel right now and to go somewhere interesting in the world that you can tell us about. But the drills that we're seeing around Taiwan, I'd love to hear you speak to, because this has been framed, the biggest drills we've seen in some time by Beijing and the Taiwan Strait, framed as punishment for swearing in their new president. I spoke yesterday with the ranking member on the China Select Committee, the House China Select Committee, of course, Raja Krishnamurthy. Here's what he said about what appears to be a deteriorating relationship once again, Congressman. Let's listen.
I don't think it's maybe deteriorating as much as it's continuing to be maybe unresolved. I think that it's really up to Xi Jinping, Joe. I think that he needs to make a decision, which is, does he continue with this policy of aggression and provocative behavior, which could potentially lead to dangerous and catastrophic consequences in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea?
How much of this is a danger, an increasing level of danger, versus, you know what, we see this movie every time Taiwan makes noise?
Well, it is a pattern of the Xi regime to intensify their military drills and be in a menacing and threatening way across the narrow Taiwan Strait whenever there appears to be progress towards supporting democracy on the island. Here we have the inauguration of a new democratically elected leader of Taiwan. Chairman Mike McCall of the Foreign Affairs Committee is leading our delegation to that inauguration. But you saw this same kind of behavior when Nancy Pelosi visited the island, when Chairman McCall and I were on the island last April.
Yes.
We had the exact same greeting.
They want to remind you that they could do a blockade in about 5 minutes if they wanted to.
They do, but look, I think fundamentally, Taiwan is a great democratic, economic, free market success story. They're big investors in China. The people of Taiwan want the status quo. They want to maintain their democracy, free and open navigation of the Taiwan Strait. They don't want to be, by warfare or force or coercion, compelled to join the communist regime in Beijing. Xi knows this, but this is how he tries to pull the string of his longstanding policy. Our policy here in the United States was founded back in 1979, where we committed that while we recognize China and Beijing as the capital of China formally, that we would maintain our economic policy and our defense policy of the people of Taiwan and let them build their democracy. And by golly, over the last 40 years, have they been successful in doing that?
And that's something. Would you go back to Taiwan knowing all of this?
I would. I think it's a magnificent, generous, innovative, amazing.
Even if it sparked more drills for them to deal with after you left.
Well, look, I think they want America, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam, regional players supporting them in their interest to pursue freedom, but status quo, not independence of China. Just let's keep the status quo, which allows our system to thrive. But the fear on the island is China turned their back on Hong Kong. Yeah. They broke their word to the United Kingdom and the people of Hong Kong, and that's what's caused tensions in the region to remain high.
The UN's top court, the International Court of Justice, am I saying it right? I don't think most people have ever heard of this before, to be honest with you. While it is, of course, very real, the International Court of Justice says that Israel needs to pull military operations from Rafah now, and this came as part of a complaint by South Africa that alleged genocide in Gaza. We've got a new temporary pier that we just spent a lot of money on that doesn't seem to be bringing much aid into Gaza. What needs to happen?
I think we need to stand with Israel and let Israel use their best judgment on clearing the Hamas terror group out of Gaza.
Are they still in Rafah? Do we know?
There are elements still in Rafah. They still are in a position to attack. We have more dead bodies of hostages announced today. This is a terrible situation. And remember that Israel has suffered an attack on the scale larger than our attack of 9/11, from their point of view, by a terror group backed by and financed by Iran, an enemy of the United States. So I think we should stand by our ally and let them take the actions that they need to take to defend their own
You don't
soil.
believe it's genocide, obviously.
I don't. And I think that the international court in this instance is wrong. We're not a party to that treaty, so we don't even think highly enough of that organization to be a subscriber to it. And I think what we ought to recognize is that we don't want this conflict to get broader. We need humanitarian aid there, and we need to recognize that Hamas is a political organization and a terror group backed by their allies like those in Turkey and Tehran have facilitated this kind of behavior through their financing and their tolerance of it. And for 20 years, Hamas has controlled Gaza. A lot of Americans don't know this. The Israeli government, the West Bank government, Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas, Americans, the Egyptians, they allowed Hamas. They won an election in 2006. They've had complete control of Gaza. Are the people better off under Gaza? What about the billions of dollars from the United Nations and donor countries? Do you see better schools? Do you see better nutrition? Do you see better jobs under the Hamas leadership? So,
should Benjamin Netanyahu come here to speak to a joint session of Congress, because the speaker is reportedly on the verge of inviting him?
I think he should. I think an ally of the United States under attack by a group of people that we recognize as a global terror organization backed by the number one state sponsor of terror, Iran, deserves to be heard in the United States.
What if Chuck Schumer says no? Does he come speak to the House alone?
I would think...
that would be quite a bit of optics.
I don't think that that's the way it would work. I believe that the majority leader would think long and hard about that.
What are you planning? You're probably not allowed to answer this for your next trip abroad. You've been conducting some pretty heady codels, including one recently to Syria. What's next on the list?
Well, I'm still concerned about countering the Assad regime and turning a terror state like Syria into a regional drug proliferation state in narco-terrorism that is poisoning young people across the Gulf and into Europe. So that's certainly something I'll remain committed to working on.
Not going to Lower Manhattan anytime soon?
Not anytime soon.
Tom Emmer was on the air. I tell you, he's struggling to keep the schedule working correctly because so many people are going to New York to show up at the courthouse.
We need all of our members available for voting. We have a 2-seat majority now. We're delighted to have the new gentleman from Bakersfield, California.
Has Vince Vaughn come by the office yet?
He has. Yeah. He'll be sworn in, and we look forward to his addition to our team.
Well, we always look forward to spending time with you. Thank you for coming to see us before you blast out of town. I hope you have a great holiday. Happy Memorial Day.
Have a great
if I
Memorial
can say
Day.
That. Thank you
nice
very
to
much.
See you.
I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. That's Congressman French Hill as we assembled our panel for a quick hit on the issue that we were just talking about, the invitation of Benjamin Netanyahu that appears to be looming. Gidi Shanzano is with us today. Of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, alongside Maura Gillespie, Republican strategist, founder of Blue Stack Strategies. Jeannie, is this going to happen? And if so, does Chuck Schumer need to get on board and invite Benjamin Netanyahu to speak to a joint session of Congress?
Yeah, I think he should. I think he will. It certainly is an example of Johnson taking it to the Democrats. This is a tough one for the Democrats. But I think, the majority leader needs to make the case that he is supportive, as Chuck Schumer always has been, of Israel. It is this policies of Netanyahu that he has an issue with, and that invitation should be forthcoming. So I think he will do that, but it's not going to be easy for the Democrats. This is Johnson has done a good one here.
Maura, your thoughts on this? You worked for a speaker. What would it say if that invitation went out without the cooperation of the Senate leader?
I was there with Speaker Boehner when Netanyahu came to Congress previously under Speaker Boehner's invitation. And yes, it's preferred that it's a unified invitation that goes out in good faith by the majority leader as well as the Speaker of the House. But, the Speaker is the Speaker of the whole House, and it's his opportunity to do so. And I think, for the American people, it'll be an important opportunity to hear from Netanyahu. To support Israel, to Jeannie's point, is not necessarily to say that you support Netanyahu, but we as an ally of Israel need to hear about what's going on there directly from the sources.
Well, we'll discuss it a lot more as we learn more about this invitation. Our panel's going to stick with us, though, Jeannie and Maura, as Donald Trump makes tracks to the Bronx. Big rally last night, and it looked a lot different than the traditional MAGA rally. We'll get into that next. To the campaign trail on Balance of Power, this is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
On a quiet day in the nation's capital, not at all on the campaign trail, certainly not last night in New York as Donald Trump made his way to the Bronx. And pretty fascinating to see a much more diverse crowd than tends to gather for a Trump rally, but the color of the hats was the same. In deep blue New York, MAGA has its moment. Donald Trump even seems to think he could win the state of New York in this election, though many wonder what world in which that could happen. The fact of the matter is, both of these candidates are making a concerted effort to win the support of Black and Hispanic voters. And that probably would not be happening if we hadn't seen the deficit in recent polling that Joe Biden is showing. Let's assemble our panel for their take on all of it. Jeannie Shanzano is with us, Bloomberg Politics contributor and now senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Maura Gillespie here as well, Republican strategist, founder BlueStack Strategies, spent many years working for the Speaker of the House, Speaker Boehner. Great to have you both with us here. Maura, I'll start with you. You know New York. You know the Republican Party. Where's Donald Trump looking here? What's the purpose of this exercise when no one seems to think he could win that blue state?
He sees, and Republicans see, a real opportunity to get the Black vote. You know, I think it's something that I don't think we talk enough about, the problems people are having with what's currently going on in more liberal run cities and states. You saw the results from Oregon's primary this week. Not great for progressives. I think that the progressive policies haven't benefited people. They're not feeling it in their pockets. And so the reflection of that is looking for somebody else's support where they felt like maybe times were better. I know that feels kind of, hard to imagine given that during Donald Trump's presidency, we were in COVID times, but prior to COVID, people felt like the economy was doing better. So yes, they are, you could be frustrated by Donald Trump. You could be, you don't have to like him to vote for him. And I think that we forget that as we talk about politics and talk about these choices. It's not binary to choose between the two as far as who you like better. It's about where do you personally feel you'll be doing better in 4 years from now.
Well, that's an important line, Jeannie. Don't have to like him to vote for him. What do you make of the crowd that showed up in New York? What does it say about New York and the candidate?
Yeah, there's nothing like a summer in the Bronx, Joe. And that's where Donald Trump was yesterday. And I have to say, and I say this reluctantly, it was a very smart move. He is doing what campaigns should be doing. We've often criticized, I shouldn't say you have not. I have often criticized Donald Trump for not reaching out beyond his base. We traditionally say he doubles down on his base. Well, this is an example of a truly smart campaign strategy of reaching out and taking it to the base of your opponent and saying, don't take this base for granted, Joe Biden and Democrats, because the fact is he doesn't have to win New York. No Republican has since Ronald Reagan. But what he can do is he can take it to Joe Biden, make Joe Biden spend money, make Joe Biden fight for those voters. And that is a brilliant strategy. The Democrats should be doing the same with Donald Trump's base. That's what you do. So very reluctantly, I say, for all the talk about, things 30, 40 years ago with Woolman Park and stuff, this was a very smart strategy on the Trump campaign's part.
Well, it's interesting, Maura. I keep hearing that only 6 or 7 states are going to decide this whole election. So why would either candidate go to a place like New York or California where it seems predetermined?
It may seem predetermined, but I do think that in both New York and California, you're starting to see some areas of those states where it's getting a little purple. And it's an opportunity to capitalize on those who are disillusioned by, government right now. They're not happy with the choices they have. And we've long said that it's not up to us as voters, or maybe I've long said that it's not up to us as voters to choose between the two, but it's up to those two candidates to convince us to vote for them. And so to Jeannie's point, Donald Trump going out and making his case to people who maybe aren't happy with how things are, well, he can make a case that he'll make it better. That's what candidates are supposed to be doing. And coming to the Bronx and going directly to them. I think one of the people who said there, we have a president here. We're going to listen at least. So I think that making that effort really does make an impact. Whether you think you're going to win that state or not, you're showing up.
Well, let's follow the money for a moment here, because one of the big headlines this week was Donald Trump and the RNC outraising Joe Biden and the DNC for the first time this cycle. And it's only 1 month, but they're hoping for a lot more, as Axios reports today that Senator J.D. Vance, supposedly on the list of potential vice presidential picks for Trump, and very close to Peter Thiel, is putting together a massive fundraiser with heavy hitters from Silicon Valley. It'll take place in, of all places, San Francisco on the 6th of June. Jeannie, how much does Joe Biden need to worry about the mega donors turning away from him and towards Trump?
Yeah, it is a concern. And again, talk about going to a blue area. There they go again. Maura just mentioned California. This will be in San Francisco. I think J.D. Vance has gotten the memo that if you want to be on the short list for VP, it is all about, well, first of all, paying homage to Donald Trump. And second of all, raising money. So he doesn't want to let Doug Burgum, win the game there. So he is doing this, and it's a smart strategy. They want to try to make what was the last month's numbers a trend. We don't know if we will see that at this point, because we can't forget Donald Trump just became the presumptive nominee. So that was a benefit and a boon for the April numbers. But yeah, they're going out there and they're going to try to make the case. And you've talked a lot about crypto on this show, Joe. Crypto has about 80 million to spend in this campaign as well at this point. Go. So there's a lot of money there.
That's a huge part of the story, as we discussed with Congressman French Hill earlier, Jeannie. Then you've got big oil, Maura, and a fascinating story on the Bloomberg here. Donald Trump raised $40 million in 1 day, cash. Events in Houston and Dallas, described by people familiar with the events. $40 million in oil money. Remembering he was looking for $1 billion. There was a story in the Washington Post that he asked for $1 billion collectively from big oil to rescind all of the climate initiatives of the Biden administration. Maybe not $1 billion, but this is one of the highest single-day hauls for a presidential candidate ever, Maura. And big oil has more money to spend, right?
Absolutely. And again, the policies of the Biden administration, but progressives around the country has not been, seen as successful. So you're seeing a big push in Texas for energy. It's a huge issue there, and there's a lot of money there. I mean, there's a lot of money to be gleaned from donors there, and so it's maybe not $1 billion, but there's more to go, as you mentioned. And I think that's an opportunity again in places where the policies or failed policies of the progressives are being reflected in communities like San Francisco, like in Austin, and in New York City. So it's definitely starting to get to people. And again, there is a lot of donors who have been sitting on the sidelines that maybe are now taking a more active role.
At the same time, though, we must acknowledge that the United States is cranking out more oil than ever. We are pumping more oil than any time in our history, Jeannie. Does Joe Biden actually have to start saying that out loud?
He absolutely should. And I think he should also stand up and say what people across the Democratic and Republican Party realize, that when Donald Trump made that promise, give me $1 billion and I will push back on all the steps that Biden administration has made as it pertains to our environment, that impacts our children and our grandchildren. You want to get support from young people. The environment is critically important to how so many of them think, because they are worried about the future. So I think the Biden team needs to put this in stark terms. Joe Biden understands, to your point, we are pumping more oil, but we all have an interest in and deep concern about the impact of the environment. Donald Trump is interested in himself, and he's willing to trade all of that for $1 billion for himself to pay off his lawyers. So that is something they should be saying. They haven't said it yet, but who knows? They may once they hear your show, Joe.
Yeah, well, God knows they're listening, Jeannie. Today's, by the way, the big gas price, the average today, AAA, national average going into Memorial Day weekend, $3.60 a gallon. When you look to New York, it's $3.68. Look to Illinois, where Democrats are going to have their convention this summer, $4 is a four handle. And in California, the aforementioned, I know it's not like the rest of the world, but $5.14. Great panel, great conversation. Love spending time with Jeannie Shanzano and Maura Gillespie. We thank you both.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
They worked until the wee hours in the House of Representatives, a late night for lawmakers, with a knockdown, drag-out markup session on the farm bill. This is now the newest controversy in Washington. When I say farm bill, I'm not only talking about farmers, I'm talking about food stamps. This is going to expire in September. Lawmakers are trying to get their arms around it right now. And the debate in the markup session went on for some time. Congressman Jonathan Jackson speaking passionately about this in the process, the Democrat from Illinois' 1st District. Let's listen.
To be sure, this bill compels us to move beyond the politics of blame so that we might embrace a more excellent way. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the Farm Bill is one of the few manifestations of the social contract this government makes with the American people. The SNAP program I would like to focus in on more singularly is a moral achievement.
And he's now with us at the table, Congressman Jonathan Jackson. Thank you for coming to see us today at Bloomberg. It's good to see you.
Great to see you.
Get some rest after all that?
Yes, it's been
It's
great.
funny, people say there's nothing left on Capitol Hill, but there's one big one left. It's called the Farm Bill.
Sure.
When did food stamps get to be so controversial? I heard Republicans in that markup session talking about robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Right. It seems like in its 118th Congress has a lot of unique things, but essentially we're talking about 1.5 trillion with the T budget that's looking out over a 5-year reauthorization, over a 10-year horizon. And out of the $1.5 trillion, 80% of that funds are going towards the SNAP, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program.
That's right.
And I have to put the focus on supplemental nutrition and assistance. The other side of that coin is dealing with malnutrition. There is rising malnutrition. If you did not have this part of the budget focused on the farming, you'd be talking about almost $15 billion in increasing malnutrition amongst American citizens. 42 million Americans qualify for supplemental nutritional assistance. Roughly $180 a month would go to these persons, $2 per meal. This is the 80% of the Farm Bill, so it goes to show you that there's food insecurity in America that we have to deal with.
Joni Ernst joined us just the other day, the senator from Iowa, said there will be no new Farm Bill. We're going to have to extend the one we have and come up with a new product. Are you hearing talk like that as well?
I'm not, but that very well could be the case. I'm more optimistic.
Yeah.
We have a great chairman and a great ranking member, Chairman Thompson, ranking member Scott. So I'm very confident, or feel highly confident, or shall I say very hopeful that we'll get through this.
Congressman, tomorrow we're going to mark 4 years since the murder of George Floyd. This is going to be a moment for our country. You were at George Floyd's funeral, and there was a thought at that time that there was great change coming, and in some cases we saw it, particularly at the local level, in new laws and regulations for policing, on the state level primarily. But there was something called the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that passed the House some time ago. It went nowhere from there, and Sheila Jackson Lee reintroduced it this week. What's different now when it comes to that legislation? Could it pass again?
It seems like everything has changed. It seems to be a complete reversal, if you will, a retreatment and a retrenchment on corporate America's commitment to racial, social, and justice equity. We've seen in the extension of our annual budget of the budget that passed, the DEI, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office on Capitol Hill was removed from out of the building. Now people are being sued after the overturn of the affirmative action ruling, if you will. that 13 attorney generals from each state sent letters to the Fortune 100 corporations saying if you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion program in place, that is subject to be challenged and sued.
How did DEI become a swear word?
I don't know. I mean, just is the most bizarre things. But then again, there are a lot of things that are anomaly here that have happened. How do we have a president, if you will, on trial for prostitution, if you will, and I don't know what hush money payments are. That's actually bribery. I mean, like, a lot of things have happened. We used to say, look up to the president.
Well, my
and
God.
if you're talking about looking up to what's happened in food, how do we become mean towards women and children? What we should be talking about is a war on poverty, not a war on the poor. These are the most vulnerable people in our society that qualify for SNAP. People don't want to have this supplemental nutritional assistance. So therefore, if you got crop insurance, meaning that there's climate issues that are out of our control, that are going through Iowa and Oklahoma and Kansas and devastating the land and the farmers, that's a subsidized program that the federal government has for farm insurance. I've come to look at SNAP as food insurance and family insurance that the government uses. So when people cannot do for themselves, I think the government should help them. When the people can do for themselves, the government needs to step back. Right now, people are aching. There's been auto inflation, there's been housing inflation, there's education, if you will, the cost of education, inflation. But this farm bill doesn't even address to deal with food inflation. And so to think that we could talk about taking $30 billion off of out of the budget to attack women and children, we're going to take a stand and we're not going to concede an inch.
You just said a lot, and I don't know anything about any prostitution charges in this case, but when we talk about...
Well, it's called pornography, but I like to call it what I think it is.
Understood what you're referring to, Congressman. What can you do in the rest of this Congress then? It sounds like your focus is on the Farm Bill. It's on food stamps as your answer to what you see as this cultural reversal. Am I right?
Yes. It's a war on the poor, that the American people have a housing issue. That's becoming 50% of the average consumer's income. We're talking about the average car is now $40,000. That's going beyond people's reach. Student debt is now shaping an entire generation where they're having to make a decision between
This is why a lot of people are criticizing Joe Biden for higher prices.
Right.
Does he deserve it?
No, I think there was a supply chain issue. I think we're going through a structural readjustment that the American people deserve, if you will, an FDR moment or Franklin Delano Roosevelt moment by President Biden to come and talk to the American people. Do the White House, do the fireside chat.
Yep.
This is our money. It's going abroad for wars. Here's what our benefit is and the peace dividend that we can expect after we define the victory. Here's what our money is going for defense. Here's what our money is going for allies abroad. And for this generation, here's what's going to be your big deal. And then the student loan debt relief is good and great, but we got to do more than that. What's the investment that enhances their life? And that's what they're being hopeful and waiting for.
I hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend. I want you to come back and talk to us about the campaign and whether the black vote will be there for Joe Biden. Would you do that for us?
I'd be honored to do so.
Thank you, Congressman
Take care.
Jonathan Jackson. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
On Bloomberg TV and radio, live from Washington, this is Balance of Power. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.